Namaskar and thank you for joining us here on the Economic Brief, your weekly update from India and the world on the state of the economy. On the show, well, February 1, it's a much anticipated day. What are the key expectations from the Union Budget 2025? We'll get ourselves familiar with some budget jargon as everyone starts talking in estimates. Let's not feel we are at a deficit. There's a new AI race, one that's picking up momentum. We'll delve into the deep-seek disruption of US tech. And Goma, which is a critical trade and transport hub in the Democratic Republic of Congo, is at risk amid rebel control. Mineral wealth is also at stake. But first, southern Indian state Kerala hopes the budget of 2024 will provide support for the state to transform into a knowledge society. The state is looking for infrastructure development. Let's listen to Kerala's Minister P. Rajiv.
Kerala is changing to a knowledge society and infrastructure development. More support should be given to the state. That is our major demand for the infrastructure activities and also for supporting the transforming to knowledge-based economy. That is the demands already submitted in black and white to the Union Minister. We are expecting a positive response in the budget this time.
Now, the Union Budget, as we know, is a document that tries to take in as much as it can in terms of stakeholders, consultations across, the Finance Minister has been doing that through the whole of December and January and to come up with this document. Now, let's see what some of the key demands are. Now, the middle class and corporates want tax reliefs. Well, everyone wants a tax relief. There's also larger tax exemptions on FDs or fixed deposits. That's what they want. This is what people want. They want debt mutual funds and bonds also to give them some sort of exemptions. Currently, we know that the fixed deposit interest rate below 40,000 rupees has no TDS. So really, it's an issue of structure because over and above that, you pay a TDS of 10%. People are concerned about paying those TDS, make things easy. Above 40,000, as I said, there's a TDS of 10%. And the non-banking financial companies, they also want TDS rationalization. TDS, the problem with some of these smaller companies is that they feel that when you pay the TDS, it sort of cuts down their fund of money so that they can't really distribute they can't use that money for what their basic purpose is, which is to lend for loans. So the NBFCs pay also 10% on interest payments. That's one of their key concerns. So also apart from this, the IT sector, which is the key sector for our services, since we are a strong economy, we are in the fourth industrial revolution. We are hoping to be at the forefront in terms of AI and things like that. The IT sector wants benefits on R&D. Naturally, they're looking for that because that will give them that kind of boost and push. And of course, there are other areas in terms of the expenditure side of the budget. We know that the government has been spending very heavily on capital expenditure. Now people are looking at percentages of GDP in terms of what people should be spending. 10% on, they say 10% on education, let's say 2.5% on healthcare, things like that. And GST, which is, of course, the structure through which most of the indirect taxes are paid in this country. They want some sort of rationalization. Small and medium businesses are concerned about the amount of the amount of paperwork that they put in terms of trying to pay their GST. They're looking also at certain types of raw materials where they can get certain lower rates of GST. So they're looking at some sort of structural reforms in terms of GST. Now, before we move ahead, we did talk about jargon that we're going to be listening to in the next coming day, in a few days that are going to come. These are terms that will be used in the budget. Anu Kaushik tells us, explains them, demystifies them for us a little bit.
From corporates to middle class, the union budget impacts every Indian and plays a major role in deciding the economic future of the country. Knowing its key terms can help you understand the importance of the budget.
First and foremost is the budget estimate, which is the projection of the expenditure and earnings of the government in a financial year. Expenditure includes allocation of funds to various ministries, payment of salaries, and spending on infrastructure. It's also important to take note of the fiscal deficit, which is the difference between the government's revenue, excluding borrowings, and expenditure. The goal is to reduce the fiscal deficit to avoid higher national debt. Fiscal policy deals with the taxation and spending decisions of the government. Coming to taxes, they are classified into direct and indirect taxes. Direct tax includes income tax, which is charged on the earning of an individual or a business. Indirect tax is levied on goods and services. It includes the goods and services tax. Rolled out in 2017, GST replaced various indirect taxes in India. Long-term capital gains tax is levied on profits earned from sale of assets like stocks, mutual funds, and residential plots. Apart from taxes, the government also raises funds through disinvestment, which is the sale of stakes in public sector undertakings. Finally, there's the finance bill, which details tax-related proposals in the budget.
The budget reflects the economic policies of the government, and knowing its implications can help you make informed financial decisions. With camera person Piyush, this is Anu Kaushik reporting for DD India.
And Prasenjit Basu, author, economist, columnist, is with us in the studio. Mr. Basu, so, I mean, can the budget achieve everyone's expectations? I mean, after all, there's a lot of consultation. I was just saying that, you know, the finance minister has been talking to almost all stakeholders.
You know, obviously cannot fulfill everybody's expectations. The main purpose of the budget is to provide a framework for the government spending and in India's case to reduce the deficit. The deficit this year is likely to be around 4.9% of GDP. That is still quite high. You know, I think it's interesting that if you go back to the FRBM, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, passed in 2002, it required that the fiscal deficit should be 3% of GDP or less.
Okay.
That was 23 years ago. And it did come down. It did come down to that sort of level briefly before the global financial crisis. And then in the first 5 years of this government, it brought the deficit down well below 3% of GDP. But then post-COVID, numbers have gone up globally. It's a global phenomenon of very high fiscal deficits. So the key purpose here now, one of the key goals is to bring down the fiscal deficit. And in the process, if you can provide for as much spending as possible on things like healthcare, infrastructure, etc., that's ideal. But the key really is that over recent years, direct tax revenues have been very buoyant. In particular, personal income tax revenues have been very buoyant. GST revenue has done reasonably well. And as a result, the government is in good shape to keep meeting its ambitious targets for deficit reduction. And in fact, in every year in the last 3 years, it has outdone the budgeted estimates in terms of reducing the deficit.
So, I mean, India is on the path to becoming the third largest economy. And you did say that the expenditure side has looked at Capex also in a big way. What would you do, to speed up the process of us reaching there faster, the third largest economy?
I think one of the areas where there's been disappointment, I would say, is privatization. Disinvestment is one thing, but this government, this finance minister 4 years ago said that she wanted to privatize all public sector enterprises with almost no exceptions. And very little has happened. We've had Air India, we've had 2 steel companies, all in that first year, and then nothing in the last 3 years. So I think that's a bit disappointing. If India is to do even better, one of the areas where I would say, it's low-hanging fruit, reduce the footprint of the government in the economy, and if you look at privatization, there's been enormous success in the privatization that occurred 20 years ago. If you look at Balco versus Nalco, both were fully public sector enterprises. Balco was much smaller. Now Balco is about the same size in terms of output as Nalco. So it's clearly grown a lot faster. Hindustan Zinc was considered a sleepy old company.
Right.
It is now, I've spoken to foreign institutional investors who cannot stop praising that company.
Sure.
So
you're looking at disinvestment as
disinvestment unleashes the productive potential of a lot of these companies,
right?
And also reduces the amount that government needs to spend. It provides an additional source of government revenue, and thereby enables the fiscal deficit to come down, apart from making the economy a lot more efficient. So,
sure.
Frankly, if we can get the fiscal deficit down to, say, 3% of GDP in the next 2 years,
okay.
One of the ways to do that would be accelerated privatization. And if you do that, you can start really crowding in a lot of private investment.
So you've been talking largely about the fiscal glide path over the, now it's supposed to be 4.5% this year actually in this budget. It was 4.9 in the last, and you're hoping that it would come to 3%. But the point is that, if we only concentrate on this, then, and the growth story is about 5% is between 5 and 7% currently, the economic growth forecasts. That doesn't augur too well in terms of your tax GDP ratio, isn't it? Because as you grow, you get more income coming in, revenues for the government. So, I mean, also talking from the point of view that where did we start? Because post-COVID, we were at 9% or something on the fiscal deficit. We brought it down to half that number. Things are certainly looking in the right direction. Shouldn't the government be so crazy about the fiscal deficit right now?
It has to be, because even though it's come down, it's almost halved by the next fiscal year, from 9.2 to 4.5. That's a huge achievement. But 4.5% of GDP is still a very high fiscal deficit, especially given the fact that the states also run deficits. And so if you look at the central and state governments together, the deficit is still around over 8% of GDP.
Okay.
So that's a very substantial footprint for government to have in an economy. That definitely needs to be reduced. If you reduce that, you can basically see interest rates, the whole structure of interest rates coming down.
Inflation.
The government then can crowd in private investment. So that's the benefit of reducing the deficit. And apart from tax revenue, the other potential source is disinvestment. Now, one other thing I'd say is that growth this year is likely to be a little over 6%. I'd say around 6.5%. That is a disappointment as well. I think India can easily do 8%. So we should really be looking at a sustainable annual growth of 8%.
Right.
So in the last 3 years, average annual growth was 8.2. If we want to sustain 8% plus growth, then some more reforms are required.
Stimulus is required, right? Yeah. And that would have an effect on the fiscal deficit. But do stay with us, Mr. Basu, for this next story, which is about AI. And, the Chinese DeepSeek R1 chatbot, as per current claims, is far more cost and energy efficient than pioneering large language models like, OpenAI's ChatGPT or Google's generative AI. And this has changed the stakes a bit, because as the model was developed using less advanced NVIDIA chips, it raised concerns among investors about the future demand for NVIDIA's high-performance AI chips. And the news led to the sell-off, wiping out, according to reports, nearly $600 billion from NVIDIA's market value. But has it actually created a new tech war? Here's our story. DeepSeek AI, a Chinese company, developed the cost-effective DeepSeek R1 chatbot for around $6 million. It uses less computing power and data than models like OpenAI's ChatGPT, which was projected to lose around $5 billion in 2024. The cost savings are staggering. Energy efficient and open source, DeepSeek is one of the top free apps on smart devices, possibly benefiting from US chip export controls.
U.S. government started to impose export control on Chinese tech firms starting from Trump's first term. But under Biden administration, they further intensified these efforts. And the most sweeping effort came in October 2022, which imposed very broad restrictions for Chinese firms to access both AI chips and chip semiconductor equipment.
The Trump administration quickly blamed Biden as the AI industry discusses DeepSeek's potential impact.
The last administration sat on their hands and allowed China to rapidly develop this AI program. And so President Trump believes in restoring American AI dominance. And that's why he took very strong executive action this past week to sign executive orders to roll back some of the onerous regulations on the AI industry. And President Trump has also proudly appointed the first AI and crypto czar at this White House, David Sachs, whom I spoke with yesterday, very knowledgeable on this subject, and his team is here working every single day to ensure American AI dominance.
The Hangzhou-based Chinese firm used less advanced H800 chips, allowed for export until late 2023 to power its model. This success highlights the ineffectiveness of US export controls in stopping other countries from developing advanced models. However, Chinese models face political limitations, especially censorship. The engine, launched on Monday, initially began answering about Chinese artist and activist Ai Weiwei, then switched to a generic message, "Sorry, that's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else." It did the same for the Dalai Lama.
Chinese companies, even if they are relatively very independent, they're still within that legal structure, within that political system, and held. They're bound to expectations that go along with that. It's hard for them to escape expectations of censorship, especially around the central topics that the Chinese government is not in favor of.
Chinese firms like Huawei thrive despite restrictions. China aims to lead AI by 2030, raising the question, is this a new tech race between the US and China, a Sputnik moment for big power rivalry? US President Donald Trump calls DeepSeek's rise a wake-up call for Silicon Valley, urging the US to focus on winning. The Economic Brief, DD India.
Mr. Basu, is DeepSeek, more hype than substance? Why would someone want to use an AI chatbot that is censored by the Chinese government?
Well, it is a lot of hype. I think that the $6 million price tag or cost tab for DeepSeek is almost certainly incorrect. Also, I think it's important to understand that DeepSeek has no revenue source at the moment. So, when you're talking about profitability, that's an issue. It is certainly not a Sputnik moment, because remember that Sputnik demonstrated that Russia got the first spaceship to leave Earth. It beat the United States on that, and that was a genuine victory in the space race. It also was the first country to send, Soviet Union was the first country to send a man, a woman, and a dog to space. So,
right.
That was the Sputnik moment. Here, DeepSeek is still only around the 10th fastest AI chatbot. It's not quicker than OpenAI's or even Google and the various other generative AI systems that exist. So it is not the cutting edge. It's not the winner just yet. It is a cheap alternative. You could think of it as a generic pharmaceutical versus a patented one.
Sure.
And the other interesting point is that DeepSeek has used NVIDIA's chips.
Yes, it has.
That's a question. Stockpiled NVIDIA's chips, and the NVIDIA ban was only imposed a few months ago.
There are some theories that they may not have used just NVIDIA chips because, one thing that comes out of this episode is that the Chinese businessmen are quite frugal. They seem to understand business cost cutting more than the Americans. But is the real story how Huawei could be actually, Huawei chips could be powering this, and that's why we don't know what the real cost is?
Well, first of all, the founder of DeepSeek has openly admitted that
he's used the H800.
He had stockpiled NVIDIA's chips, and that's what he used. So Huawei is quite a bit further behind. B, I think it's also important to understand that if DeepSeek succeeds, if it becomes a real success story, the poor founder of DeepSeek is likely to end up in jail. I mean, this is what happens to the richest man in China every single time. I mean, I've looked at the last 10 cases of a man or woman becoming the richest person in China. Next thing you know is that they end up in jail or exile or out of circulation for 2 years, etc. So, the problem is that the private sector does not have much freedom in China. It is the private companies that have come up with some of the greatest advances in China. If you think about Alibaba, all of these companies, Baidu, etc., they're all private companies that have operated in a very difficult environment. They have less access to credit, and they still emerge. So the entrepreneurship in China is a huge story. There's no doubt about it. The only problem is that entrepreneurs are a threat to the state, they're a threat to the Communist Party, and that limits their ability to go beyond certain limits.
Now, now India is also developing a semiconductor ecosystem, investing in AI. India is also working on this large language model for Indian languages to use and for people to be more familiar with it here in our country. Given the fact that India is also in the race, I mean, what do you think? I mean, the budget should also be focusing a little bit on this?
We cannot ignore it. We certainly need to keep the focus. Now, the problem in India, I think, is that if you look at India as a manufacturing hub, India is a very successful manufacturer of steel, aluminium, cement, cars, pharmaceuticals, petrochemicals, refined petroleum. So there's a whole bunch of things where India is actually the second or third or fourth largest producer in the world. So, but the problem is that in semiconductors, we are beginners. We haven't yet started producing our first substantial semiconductors. We do a lot of chip design, but not actual manufacturing. So we have one part of the ecosystem missing in India, and that is where the focus needs to be, and has been for the last 3 or 4 years. The budgets have focused a lot of attention on developing a semiconductor ecosystem. There are at least 4 semiconductor projects that are on the anvil.
Right.
So that's a start. But this sort of start was made by Taiwan 35 years ago or 37 years ago. So compared to them, we are quite a bit quite far behind. So there's a lot of catching up to do, and certainly the budget can play a part in encouraging the development of that ecosystem, including encouraging some of our companies. I mean, we are a software powerhouse. Why didn't some of our Indian companies come up with what DeepSeek has done? I mean, after all, DeepSeek
they probably would.
Well, now they can use some of the open source material and come up with an alternative. If it is genuinely open source, it should be easy for someone else to copy.
We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Prasenjit Basu. Thank you for joining us on the Economic Brief. Well, times they seem to be changing. Now, the strategic city of Goma, situated in the Democratic Republic of Congo, has fallen into the hands of rebel fighters, further intensifying an already volatile situation. As control of key minerals like gold, tin and coltan shifts, the economic consequences are being felt both locally and globally. We leave you with Diptanshu Kashyap's report, gives us a closer look at the situation.
The Democratic Republic of Congo's eastern region is once again under siege. The M23 rebel group, led by ethnic Tutsis, has swiftly advanced, seizing control of Goma, a key city of over 1 million people. Situated at the borders of Rwanda and Uganda, Goma serves as a critical trade and transport hub. With the M23 in control, the region's economic stability and its role in global supply chains are at significant risk.
We are at critical juncture, and I felt it was my duty to reiterate on behalf of the government and the people of the DRC the urgent need for decisive action by the Council. Rwanda cannot be allowed to continue to act with impunity, and I therefore called on the Council to act in defense of the principles of multilateralism and international law.
The current violence in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is deeply rooted in the aftermath of the 1994 Rwandan genocide, when ethnic Hutu extremists slaughtered around 800,000 Tutsis. Following the genocide, around 1 million Hutus fled to neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo, fueling ethnic tensions that persist today. These tensions have sparked a series of rebellions, citing the failure of promises to protect Tutsi communities in the region. Rwanda, accused of backing the M23, has denied direct involvement despite allegations of military support. The Eastern Congo region is abundant in gold, tin and coltan, minerals crucial for electronics and electric vehicle production. Coltan in particular is a vital component in smartphones and electric vehicle batteries. With the M23 now in control of key mineral-rich territories, the group gains access to these vital resources, funding their insurgency. Rwanda, although denying direct support for the rebels, has long been economically tied to Congo's resources, especially coltan. As the world's largest exporter of tantalum, a key derivative of Congo's coltan, Rwanda's economic growth is increasingly reliant on these minerals, which has sparked accusations of exploitations amid the ongoing conflict. The humanitarian crisis in Goma is escalating. Civilians have been displaced and local industries have come to a halt. Hospitals are overwhelmed and aid organizations are struggling to meet the growing needs. The economic toll is severe, not only Goma's residents but for global industries reliant on the region's minerals. Despite the presence of over 10,000 UN peacekeepers, the crisis continues to deepen and a resolution remains elusive. Diptanshu Kashyap's report for the Economic Brief, DD India.